The dust swirled across the lone road leading into Grass Valley, Nevada, as the morning stagecoach rumbled to a stop outside the town's only hotel. It was the summer of 1875, and the sun beat down relentlessly upon the wooden structures that lined the main street, their paint peeling in the unforgiving desert heat. Among those waiting on the hotel's porch was Lilian Turner, her trunk packed with teaching supplies and a letter of introduction clutched tightly in her gloved hand. She had come west to take up a position as the town's new schoolteacher, leaving behind the comforts of Boston society to forge her own path in a world that offered women few choices beyond marriage. The stagecoach door swung open, and Lilian stepped down carefully, adjusting her bonnet to shield her eyes from the glare. At 22, she possessed a quiet determination that had carried her through 4 years of normal school and now across a continent to this dusty frontier town. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly beneath her hat, and her simple blue traveling dress, though wrinkled from the journey, marked her as educated and respectable. "Miss Turner," a gruff voice called out from the hotel entrance, "we've been expecting you." Mayor Horace Wilson was a portly man with a walrus mustache who dabbed at his perspiring forehead with a handkerchief. "Welcome to Grass Valley. We're mighty pleased to have a proper teacher for our young ones." "Thank you, Mayor Wilson," Lilian replied, shaking his offered hand. "I'm eager to begin. When might I see the schoolhouse?" The mayor's face flushed slightly. "Well now, the building needs some attention. Been vacant these past 2 years since old Mrs. Pettigrew passed, but we've got a place for you to stay room above the general store. The proprietor's widow, Mrs. Harmon, takes in boarders." Lilian nodded, hiding her disappointment. In her correspondence, the school board had painted a much more established picture of the educational facilities, but she was not one to shirk from challenges. "That will be fine," she said. "I'd like to settle in today and perhaps tour the schoolhouse tomorrow." "I'll have someone show you around," Mayor Wilson said, motioning to a young boy loitering nearby. "Tommy, fetch Mr. Evans from the livery and tell him the new teacher's arrived." As Tommy scampered off, Lilian's gaze wandered down the dusty Main Street. Grass Valley was smaller than she had anticipated, a few dozen buildings clustered around the road, with farms and ranches dotting the valley beyond. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing against the vast blue sky. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention back to the street. A tall man on a chestnut horse rode toward them, his broad-shouldered silhouette unmistakably that of a lifetime horseman. As he drew closer, Lilian could see his weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, lines etched around eyes that had spent years squinting into the sun. "That's Gordon Evans," the mayor explained. "Owns the biggest spread in these parts, the Double E. He's on the school board. Insisted we bring in a proper teacher instead of just anyone who could raid." Gordon Evans dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. He was older than Lilian had expected, perhaps in his mid-30s, with streaks of silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. His face was tanned from endless days in the saddle, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble. "Miss Turner," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep, with a hint of something Lilian couldn't quite place, education, perhaps, beneath the frontier drawl. "Welcome to Grass Valley. Mr. Evans," she nodded, meeting his gaze. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "I understand you'll be showing me around town," she asked. A brief shadow crossed his face. "Mayor Wilson's getting ahead of himself. I came to offer you a ride out to my ranch tomorrow, my daughter." He paused, something painful flickering in his eyes. "She won't be attending school in town." "I'd like to discuss private lessons." Mayor Wilson cleared his throat awkwardly. Now, Gordon, Miss Turner's been hired to teach all the children. And she will, Gordon replied, his tone brooking no argument. But Sarah needs special attention. He turned back to Lilian. I'll send a buggy for you tomorrow at noon, if that's agreeable. Before Lilian could respond, he had remounted and tipped his hat once more. Until tomorrow, Miss Turner. With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode back down the street, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Don't mind Evans, Mayor Wilson said with a sigh. Lost his wife 3 years back. Hasn't been the same since, nor has his girl, his daughter, Lilian asked, watching Gordon Evans's retreating figure. Sarah. Sweet child, 10 years old now, used to be the liveliest little thing you ever saw. The mayor shook his head sadly. Hasn't spoken a word since her mama died. Doctor says there's nothing wrong with her throat or such, just won't talk. Evans has tried everything. Lilian felt a pang of sympathy. What happened to Mrs. Evans? Fell from her horse during a thunderstorm. Gordon found her too late. The mayor lowered his voice. Some say Sarah saw it happen, been silent ever since that day. The weight of this tragedy settled over Lilian as she was led to her lodgings. That evening, as she unpacked her modest belongings in the small but clean room above the general store, she found herself thinking of the taciturn rancher and his silent daughter. In her training, she had learned of cases where trauma caused children to retreat into silence. Perhaps this was why she had been drawn to the frontier, not just to escape the confines of Eastern expectations, but to make a real difference in lives that needed healing. The following day, precisely at noon, a well-maintained buggy pulled up outside Mrs. Harmon's boarding house. To Lilian's surprise, Gordon Evans himself held the reins rather than sending a ranch hand. Good afternoon, Mr. Evans, she greeted him, accepting his help into the buggy. Miss Turner, he nodded, settling beside her. As they pulled away from town, Lilian noticed how his hands gripped the reins strong. Calloused hands accustomed to hard work, yet handling the leather with gentle precision. They rode in silence for a time, the landscape opening around them, rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and juniper, cattle grazing in the distance. Finally, Gordon spoke. I should tell you about Sarah, he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. She's smart, reads well above her age. Her mother taught her letters early, but since Elizabeth died, he swallowed hard. She won't speak, not a word in 3 years. The mayor mentioned this, Lilian said gently. Has she seen doctors? Every doctor between here and San Francisco, he replied, frustration evident in his voice. They all say the same thing, nothing physically wrong. It's in her mind, they say, as if that helps. He glanced at Lilian briefly. I don't expect you to work miracles, Miss Turner, but she needs education, and I can't send her to town like this. The other children. Children can be cruel without meaning to be, Lilian finished for him. I understand. Gordon nodded, relief evident in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. I can pay well for private lessons, 3 times a week, perhaps. Let me meet Sarah first, Lilian suggested. Then we can determine what arrangement might work best. As they crested a rise, the Double E Ranch came into view. It was impressive, a large main house built of solid timber, a sprawling barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Corrals held horses in various stages of training, and cowboys moved about their tasks with practiced efficiency. This was no struggling homestead, but a prosperous operation. Gordon guided the buggy to the main house, which revealed itself to be even more substantial up close, 2 stories, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Unlike most frontier homes, it showed feminine touches, flower boxes under windows, curtains visible through clean glass panes, a porch swing swaying gently in the breeze. Elizabeth planned this house, Gordon said quietly, noticing Lilian's appraisal. Had it built just how she wanted. Never did see it completed. He helped Lilian down from the buggy and they climbed the porch steps together. The front door opened before they reached it, and an older woman with a kind face stood waiting. Mrs. Peterson, Gordon nodded. This is Miss Turner, the new schoolteacher. Miss Turner, this is Mrs. Peterson, our housekeeper. A pleasure to meet you, the woman said warmly. Come in, come in. Sarah's in the garden, I'll fetch her. The interior of the Evans home was surprisingly refined for a ranch house. Quality furniture, some clearly brought from back east, filled the rooms. Books lined shelves in what appeared to be a study, and framed drawings childish but showing talent adorned the walls. Sarah's work, Gordon explained, following Lilian's gaze. She draws constantly, it's how she communicates, I suppose. The back door opened, and Mrs. Peterson returned with a small figure trailing behind her. Sarah Evans was thin for her age, with long dark braids and her father's startling blue eyes. She wore a simple calico dress and her hands clutched a small sketchbook. Sarah, this is Miss Turner, Gordon said gently. She's come to talk about your lessons. The girl regarded Lilian solemnly, her expression neither welcoming nor hostile, simply observant. She made no attempt to speak or even nod in greeting. Lilian knelt to bring herself to Sarah's level. Hello, Sarah. I'm very pleased to meet you. Your father tells me you enjoy reading and drawing. No response came, but the girl's eyes remained fixed on Lilian's face, studying her with an intensity that was almost unnerving in one so young. Perhaps you could show me some of your drawings. Lilian suggested. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah opened her sketchbook and turned it toward Lilian. The page showed a detailed drawing of a wild horse, its mane flowing as it galloped. The skill displayed was remarkable for a child of 10. This is beautiful, Lilian said sincerely. You have a true gift. For the first time, a flicker of expression crossed Sarah's face, a hint of pride quickly suppressed. She turned another page, revealing a sketch of a woman on horseback, her face rendered with loving detail. Your mother? Lilian asked gently. Sarah nodded the smallest dip of her chin, but a response nonetheless. Gordon inhaled sharply behind them, and Lilian realized this simple interaction might be more than the girl typically offered. Well, Lilian said, standing, I think we might work well together, Sarah. Would you mind if I came to teach you a few times each week? Sarah glanced at her father, then back to Lilian. After a moment, she nodded again. Excellent, Lilian smiled. Perhaps we could start tomorrow. I'll bring some books I think you might enjoy. Later, as Gordon drove Lilian back to town, a different kind of silence settled between them, not awkward but contemplative. She responded to you, he said finally, more than she has to any stranger in years. Children often respond to those who don't pressure them, Lilian replied. And I'm not a doctor trying to make her speak. No, Gordon agreed, you're not. He glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. Thank you for your patience with her. There's no need for thanks, Mr. Evans. Teaching Sarah will be a privilege, not a burden. As they approached town, the setting sun cast long shadows across the valley. Lilian found herself looking forward to her lessons with the silent girl, and perhaps, if she was honest with herself, to seeing more of the reserved rancher who clearly adored his daughter. The following weeks established a routine. 3 mornings each week, Gordon would send a ranch hand to bring Lilian to the Double E. She would spend 2 hours with Sarah, working on reading, mathematics, geography, and history. The girl proved to be exceptionally bright, absorbing information quickly and demonstrating understanding through written work and her ever-present drawings. On the 4th week, Lilian arrived at the ranch to find Gordon waiting on the porch rather than the usual ranch hand. I thought I'd bring you myself today, he explained, helping her down from the buggy. "Wanted to talk to you about Sarah's progress." "She's doing very well," Lilian assured him as they walked toward the house. "Her written compositions are excellent vocabulary far beyond her years." Gordon nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I've noticed changes, small ones. She's drawing more, leaving pictures for me to find. Before you came, she'd barely acknowledge me some days." Lilian felt a warm satisfaction. "She's finding ways to connect. That's significant progress." "I know you're focused on her education," Gordon said hesitantly, "but I can't help hoping that someday." "She'll speak again," Lilian finished for him. "I believe she will, Mr. Evans, but it must come in her own time, not ours." He looked at her gratefully, and for a moment, Lilian glimpsed vulnerability beneath his stoic exterior. "You understand her somehow. It's more than I've been able to do." "That's not true," Lilian contradicted gently. "You've given her a safe place to heal. That's everything." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of shared concern for Sarah that had grown into something more complex. Gordon cleared his throat and looked away first. "I'll leave you to your lesson, then." As summer progressed into autumn, Lilian's life settled into a satisfying rhythm. Mornings were spent teaching in the newly refurbished schoolhouse in town, afternoons with Sarah at the ranch, and evenings preparing lessons and occasionally joining in community gatherings. She found herself welcomed by most of Grass Valley's residents, though some whispered about her frequent visits to the Evans ranch. "Don't pay them any mind," Mrs. Harmon advised one evening when Lilian returned to find her landlady shooing gossiping women from her store. "They've nothing better to do than speculate about Gordon Evans. Man hasn't looked twice at a woman since Elizabeth died, so naturally they assume when he does, there must be something scandalous about it." "Mr. Evans and I have a strictly professional relationship," Lilian protested, feeling her cheeks warm. Mrs. Harmon raised an eyebrow. "Of course you do, dear, and I'm Queen Victoria." Despite her denials, Lilian couldn't help noticing how Gordon had begun timing his return from the range to coincide with the end of Sarah's lessons. He would appear, dust-covered and weary, but his face would lighten at the sight of Lilian on the porch with his daughter. Sometimes he would join them for tea, listening as Lilian recounted Sarah's accomplishments for the day. One crisp October afternoon, Lilian arrived at the ranch to find Sarah waiting by the corral rather than in the house. A beautiful pinto pony stood beside her, and the girl was sketching intently. "Is this a new friend?" Lilian asked, approaching slowly so as not to startle the horse. Sarah nodded, offering her sketchbook. The drawing showed the pony in exquisite detail, down to a distinctive marking on its foreleg. "She's beautiful," Lilian said, genuinely impressed. "Does she have a name?" Sarah hesitated, then wrote carefully at the bottom of the drawing, "Starlight." "A perfect name," Lilian smiled. "Is she yours?" Another nod, more enthusiastic this time. "From your father," Sarah wrote again. "Birthday present 10 days ago." Lilian realized with a pang that she hadn't known about the child's birthday. "Well, happy belated birthday. 11 is quite grown up." Sarah's expression turned serious and she wrote, "Papa says Mama got me a pony for my 5th birthday. I don't remember." It was the most personal information Sarah had ever voluntarily shared, and Lilian felt the weight of this trust. "Memory is strange that way," she said carefully. "Sometimes the most important things are the hardest to recall clearly." Sarah studied Lilian's face for a long moment, then wrote, "Do you think Mama would be sad that I can't talk about her?" Lilian's heart ached at the question. "I think your mother would understand completely," she said gently. "And I think she would be very proud of how brave you've been." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them back resolutely. She wrote again, "Papa tries not to be sad, but I hear him at night sometimes." Lilian placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "It's all right for both of you to be sad. but it's also all right to be happy again someday. Sarah considered this, then wrote, I like when you're here. Papa smiles more. Before Lilian could formulate a response to this startling observation, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Gordon appeared with several ranch hands, returning from checking fence lines on the northern boundary. Miss Turner, he called, dismounting. I see Sarah's showing off her birthday gift. She is indeed, Lilian replied, still processing Sarah's written confession. She's quite the artist. She's captured starlight perfectly. Gordon approached, removing his gloves. His face was wind-burned, his hair tousled, but his eyes were warm as they met Lilian's. Sarah gets that talent from her mother. Elizabeth could draw anything she saw. You never mentioned it was Sarah's birthday, Lilian said. A shadow crossed his face. It's a difficult day. Elizabeth died 3 days after Sarah turned 8. The dates are tangled together. Sarah tugged at her father's sleeve and showed him what she had written to Lilian. Gordon read it, his expression softening. Yes, he said quietly, I do smile more when Miss Turner visits. He glanced at Lilian, something unreadable in his eyes. Perhaps we both do. That evening, as the ranch hand drove Lilian back to town, she found herself dwelling on Gordon's words and the look that had accompanied them. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been denying for weeks. Her feelings for Gordon Evans had grown beyond professional respect or even friendship. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. She was here to teach, to build her own independent life. Romantic entanglements had never been part of her plan. Yet as autumn deepened toward winter, Lilian found increasingly frequent reasons to extend her visits to the Double E. Sarah's progress warranted discussion. Preparations for the school Christmas pageant required Gordon's input as a school board member. A particularly severe snowstorm made returning to town inadvisable, resulting in Lilian spending 2 nights in the ranch's guest room. During those unexpected days of isolation, Lilian saw a different side of Gordon relaxed in his own home, playing chess with Sarah in the evenings, reading aloud from Dickens while snow piled against the windows. On the second night after Sarah had gone to bed, Gordon poured 2 glasses of brandy and joined Lilian by the fire. I never properly thanked you, he said, handing her one of the glasses. For what? She asked, accepting the drink. For Sarah, she's different since you came, engaged, present. He turned the glass in his hands, watching the firelight play through the amber liquid. For 3 years, it was like she was here but not here, going through motions, existing but not living. Children are remarkably resilient, Lilian said. Sometimes they just need time and the right circumstances to heal. Gordon shook his head. It's more than that. You've given her something I couldn't. What's that? Hope. He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. You speak to her as if her silence is temporary, not defining. You expect her voice to return someday. Because it will, Lilian said with quiet certainty. How can you be so sure? There was a desperate quality to his question that suggested he'd been afraid to hope for too long. Because I see it in her eyes, Lilian replied. Words are building inside her. One day, when she's ready, they'll come. Gordon studied her face in the firelight. You're an extraordinary woman, Lilian Turner. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the brandy or the fire. I'm just a schoolteacher, she demurred. No, he said firmly. You're much more than that. He set down his glass and moved closer to her on the settee. I never expected to feel this way again. Gordon, she began, but he gently took her hand. I know it's too soon. I know you came here for independence, not this. But I need you to know that my feelings for you have grown beyond gratitude or friendship. Lillian's heart raced as she looked into his eyes, no longer distant or guarded, but open and vulnerable. "I've tried to deny my own feelings," she admitted. "It seemed improper, unprofessional." "Is that all that concerns you?" he asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. She considered carefully before answering. "No, there's Sarah to consider. Her well-being must come first." Gordon nodded. "I agree completely, which is why I've said nothing until now. But seeing you with her these past days, the way she turns to you, trusts you, I believe you're already healing something in both of us." The snowstorm passed, and Lillian returned to town, her relationship with Gordon shifting into something undefined yet undeniably changed. Their interactions carried new undercurrents of awareness, small touches lingering longer than necessary. Glances held a moment past propriety. December arrived with preparations for Christmas, and Sarah threw herself into creating decorations for both the ranch house and the schoolhouse in town. Her artistic talents flourished under Lillian's encouragement, and she began producing small gifts for the ranch hands, each personalized drawing capturing something unique about its intended recipient. A week before Christmas, Lillian arrived for Sarah's lesson to find the girl waiting with unusual anticipation, practically bouncing with excitement as she presented Lillian with a folded piece of paper. Inside was an invitation, carefully printed in Sarah's neat handwriting. "Miss Turner, please join us for Christmas dinner at the Double E Ranch. Papa says to tell you we would be honored by your presence. Sarah Evans." "This is lovely," Lillian smiled, touched by the formal invitation. "I would be delighted to join you." Sarah beamed, then surprised Lillian by throwing her arms around the teacher's waist in an impulsive hug. It was the first such demonstration of physical affection the child had offered, and Lillian fought back tears as she returned the embrace. That day's lesson was particularly productive, with Sarah mastering a complex multiplication technique they'd been working on for weeks. As they finished, Gordon appeared in the doorway of the study, his expression unusually serious. "Sarah, would you help Mrs. Peterson check on the Christmas cookies?" he asked. "I need to speak with Miss Turner." The girl gathered her books and skipped out, pausing to give her father's hand a squeeze as she passed. Once she was gone, Gordon closed the door partially and turned to Lillian. "There's something you should know," he said, his voice low. "Thomas Blackwell is back in town." Lillian frowned, unfamiliar with the name. "Should that mean something to me?" Gordon ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of distress. "He was Elizabeth's cousin. He was riding with her the day she died." "I didn't realize anyone was with her," Lillian said carefully. "Few people know. He left town the day after the funeral." Gordon's jaw tightened. "There was an argument before they rode out. Elizabeth was upset." Understanding dawned. "You think he was somehow responsible?" "I don't know," Gordon admitted, the words seeming to pain him. "He claims they separated, that she wanted to ride alone, but they were heading to the same place and a storm was brewing. Why wouldn't he stay with her? What does this have to do with Sarah?" Lillian asked, though she was beginning to suspect. "She was there," Gordon said heavily. "Not when Elizabeth fell, at least I don't think so, but she found them both. Elizabeth was already." He swallowed hard. "And Thomas was there. Sarah hasn't spoken since." "You think she witnessed something?" "I think she knows something she can't or won't tell me." Gordon moved to the window, looking out at the mountains. "Thomas is saying he's back to reconcile with family for Christmas. I don't want him anywhere near Sarah." "Of course not," Lillian agreed. "But perhaps his return could provide answers, if Sarah could somehow communicate what happened." "I've tried for 3 years," Gordon said, frustration evident in his voice. "She either can't or won't revisit that day, even in her drawings." "Has she seen Thomas since then?" "No." He left before she came home from the doctor's. She was in shock for days. Lilian considered this information carefully. If Thomas is truly innocent, his presence might not affect her, but if he's not, that's what I'm afraid of, Gordon admitted. Seeing him could traumatize her all over again. Or it could be the key to her finding her voice, Lilian suggested gently. Gordon turned to look at her, conflict evident in his expression. Are you suggesting we deliberately expose her to him? No, Lilian said quickly. But Grass Valley is small. An encounter may be inevitable. We should prepare her, not hide it from her. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right, as usual. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. How did you become so wise, Lilian Turner? Not wisdom, she demurred. Just experience with children. They sense when adults are keeping secrets, and it rarely helps them. Gordon moved closer, taking her hands in his. Whatever happens, I'm grateful you're here for Sarah and for me. Before she could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her expression puzzled at finding them standing so close. Gordon released Lilian's hands, but not before his daughter had seen the gesture. Rather than appearing troubled, however, Sarah smiled a small, knowing smile that transformed her solemn face. The following days brought a flurry of holiday preparations. Lilian divided her time between the schoolhouse in town, where the Christmas pageant was taking shape, and the Evans Ranch, where Sarah was creating increasingly elaborate decorations. Gordon, meanwhile, was watchful and tense, his eyes constantly scanning for any sign of Thomas Blackwell when they ventured into town. 3 days before Christmas, as Lilian supervised the final pageant rehearsal, she noticed a stranger standing at the back of the schoolroom, a tall man with fair hair and expensive clothing that marked him as not from Grass Valley. Something in his posture, a certain set of the shoulders, reminded her of Gordon, though this man was slighter of build and fairer of complexion. When rehearsal ended and the children dispersed, the man approached, removing his hat. Miss Turner, he inquired. I'm Thomas Blackwell. Mayor Wilson mentioned you're teaching my young cousin. Lilian maintained her composure with effort. Mr. Blackwell. Yes, I work with Sarah 3 times a week. How is she? He asked, genuine concern in his voice. I've been abroad these past years. Only just learned she hasn't spoken since. The accident. She's a bright, talented child, Lilian answered carefully. She communicates quite effectively in her own way. I'd very much like to see her, Blackwell said. Gordon and I were close once. Elizabeth's death, it came between us. Lilian considered her response, studying the man's face for any sign of deception. He appeared sincere, his eyes holding a sadness that seemed genuine. Mr. Evans is protective of his daughter, she said finally. Perhaps you should approach him directly. I've tried, Blackwell sighed. He refuses to see me. I thought perhaps you might. He trailed off, seeming to reconsider. Forgive me, I shouldn't place you in the middle. No, Lilian agreed, you shouldn't. But I will tell Mr. Evans we spoke. The decision must be his. Blackwell nodded, replacing his hat. Fair enough. I'm staying at the hotel through Christmas. Please tell Gordon I only want to make peace for Elizabeth's sake, if nothing else. After he left, Lilian sat at her desk, troubled. Thomas Blackwell seemed sincere, yet Gordon's distrust ran deep. And what of Sarah? If seeing her mother's cousin would trigger painful memories, was it worth the risk? That afternoon, when Lilian arrived at the Double E, she found Gordon in the barn, inspecting a new foal. She joined him, admiring the wobbly-legged creature as it nestled against its mother. Gordon, she said quietly, Thomas Blackwell came to the school today. His entire body tensed, though his hands remained gentle on the foal. What did he want? To see Sarah. He says he wants to make peace. Gordon straightened, turning to face her. And you believe him? I don't know him well enough to judge, Lilian replied honestly. He seemed sincere, but that means little. Gordon ran a hand over his face. Did he say anything about that day, about Elizabeth? Only that her death came between you. He called it an accident. An accident, Gordon repeated, bitterness edging his voice. Is it an accident when you leave a woman alone in a brewing storm, when you know the trail is dangerous and she's upset? What exactly are you accusing him of, Gordon? Lilian asked gently. He leaned against a post, suddenly looking weary. I don't know, not murder, not exactly, but negligence, certainly. Cowardice, at the very least. He looked at her directly. Elizabeth and Thomas argued that morning. I don't know about what she wouldn't tell me. But she was distraught when they rode out. And you believe this argument led somehow to her death? I believe if he hadn't upset her, if he had stayed with her, she might have come home safely. Gordon's voice cracked slightly. Instead, Sarah found her mother broken on the rocks and Thomas standing over her, too late to help. Lilian moved closer, placing a hand on his arm. Have you considered that this might be weighing on Thomas as well? Perhaps his desire to see Sarah is genuine, a need for forgiveness. Gordon's expression softened as he covered her hand with his own. You always look for the best in people, don't you? I try, she admitted. It serves me well as a teacher. And as a friend, he added, his eyes warming as they met hers. After a moment, he sighed. I'll think about what you've said, but I won't force Sarah to see him. Of course not, Lilian agreed. But perhaps we should ask her. In her own way, she can tell us what she wants. Gordon considered this, then nodded reluctantly. You're right. She deserves that much. When they approached Sarah with the question, the girl's reaction surprised them both. Rather than showing fear or distress at the mention of her mother's cousin, she reached for her sketchbook and wrote, I remember Uncle Thomas. He was sad at the funeral. Gordon and Lilian exchanged glances. Would you like to see him? Gordon asked carefully. Sarah considered this, then wrote, Will it make you angry, Papa? Gordon knelt beside his daughter, taking her small hands in his. Nothing you want could make me angry, Sarah. If you wish to see Thomas, I'll arrange it. The girl studied her father's face, then wrote, I would like to see him, but not alone. Of course not, Gordon assured her. I'll be right there with you. Sarah shook her head and pointed to Lilian, then wrote, Miss Turner, too. She makes everything feel safe. Gordon's eyes met Lilian's over Sarah's head, gratitude and something deeper reflected in their blue depths. Yes, he agreed softly. She does. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon. Thomas Blackwell would come to the ranch where Sarah would feel most secure. The hours leading up to his arrival were tense, with Gordon alternately pacing and checking his pocket watch. Sarah, surprisingly, seemed the calmest of them all, sitting on the porch with her sketchbook, occasionally glancing up at the road with curiosity rather than dread. When Thomas's rented buggy appeared on the horizon, Gordon moved to stand beside his daughter, one hand protectively on her shoulder. Lilian positioned herself on Sarah's other side, offering quiet reassurance with her presence. The buggy pulled up and Thomas Blackwell descended, looking less polished than he had at the school, more nervous, more human. He removed his hat as he approached the porch steps, his eyes fixed on Sarah. Hello, Sarah, he said softly. You've grown so much. To everyone's surprise, Sarah rose and walked down the steps to meet him. She carried her sketchbook and offered it to him, open to a page she had clearly prepared in advance. Thomas accepted it with trembling hands, reading the carefully printed message. I remember you held Mama's hand until the doctor came. Thank you. Tears filled the man's eyes. You were there, he whispered. You saw. Sarah nodded, then took back the book and wrote, I climbed the rocks to follow you both. Mama's horse slipped on loose stones. You tried to reach her. Gordon made a strangled sound and moved swiftly down the steps. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice raw with emotion. "You tried to save her." Thomas looked up, grief etched in his features. "Of course I tried. She was my cousin, Gordon. I loved her too." "But you argued," Gordon insisted. "She was upset when you rode out." "Yes," Thomas admitted. "About you, actually. She thought I should stop trying to convince you to sell the ranch, move back east." He glanced at Sarah, who was watching them intently. "Elizabeth was defending your right to raise your daughter where you chose. I was wrong, and I told her so just before." His voice broke. "Before we reached the ridge. She wanted to ride ahead to clear her head. I let her go just for a few minutes. Then I heard the horse scream." Gordon staggered slightly, as if the weight of 3 years of suspicion and anger was suddenly lifting, leaving him unbalanced. "Why didn't you tell me this?" "I tried," Thomas said simply. "At the funeral. You wouldn't listen. Then Sarah stopped speaking, and you blamed me for that too. It seemed better to leave, give you both time to heal." Sarah tugged at her father's sleeve, showing him another page in her book. "I couldn't talk because I thought you would be too sad if you knew I saw Mama fall. I was supposed to be at Mrs. Peterson's. I disobeyed." Gordon knelt beside his daughter, his eyes swimming with tears. "Oh, Sarah. You've been carrying this all alone. You thought I would be angry with you." The girl nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "Never," Gordon said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. "Never, my brave girl. What happened to your mother was an accident, a terrible accident. No one is to blame, not Thomas, not you, not anyone." Over Sarah's head, Gordon's eyes met Thomas's. "I've wronged you," he said hoarsely. "For 3 years I've blamed you for something beyond your control." "You were grieving," Thomas replied. "We all were." Sarah pulled back from her father's embrace and looked up at him with determination in her young face. Her lips moved silently at first, as if she had forgotten how to form words. Then, in a voice raspy from disuse, she whispered, "Mama loved you, Papa." Gordon's face transformed with wonder. "Sarah," he breathed, "you're speaking." "It hurts," she said, touching her throat, "like remembering how to ride a bicycle." Lilian, who had been watching from the porch, wiped tears from her cheeks. The moment was too private, too sacred for her to intrude upon. She began to step back to give the family their space, but Sarah spotted her movement. "Miss Turner," the girl called, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Please don't go. I want to thank you." Gordon turned, extending his hand toward Lilian. "Yes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Please stay. You've helped make this miracle possible." As Lilian joined them in the yard, Thomas discreetly excused himself, promising to return the following day when emotions had settled. Gordon hardly seemed to notice his departure, his focus entirely on his daughter, who was speaking more with each passing minute, the words flowing easier as she rediscovered her voice. That evening, after Sarah had finally been persuaded to rest her newly recovered voice and go to bed, Gordon and Lilian sat together on the porch swing, watching stars appear in the clear winter sky. "I don't know how to thank you," Gordon said, his arm resting comfortably around Lilian's shoulders. "I did very little," she demurred. Sarah found her own way back to speaking. "No," he disagreed gently. "You created the safe place where she could heal. You showed her it was all right to trust again, to feel again." He turned to face her more directly. "You showed us both." In the silver moonlight, his eyes held a question one Lilian had been anticipating, perhaps even longing for. "Gordon," she began, but he placed a finger gently against her lips. "Let me," he said. "These past months, watching you with Sarah, seeing your kindness, your patience, your strength, I've fallen in love with you, Lilian Turner. I know it may seem too soon, that you came west for independence, not to become a rancher's wife. But I'm asking you to consider a life here with us, not as Sarah's teacher but as her mother," Lilian whispered. As my wife, Gordon corrected softly. Though I know Sarah already loves you as a mother. Lillian's heart seemed to expand in her chest, too full of emotion to be contained. I came to Grass Valley looking for purpose, she said. I never expected to find a family. She reached up to touch his face. Yes, Gordon Evans, I will marry you. I love you both too much to imagine any other future. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with promise and passion long suppressed. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, a small voice from the doorway interrupted them. Does this mean Miss Turner will stay forever? They turned to find Sarah in her nightgown, her eyes bright with hope. If that's what you want, Lilian said, opening her arms to the child. Sarah rushed into her embrace. It's what I've been wishing for, she confessed. Since the first day you came. Gordon enfolded them both in his arms. Then it seems your wish has come true, my darling. And yours, Papa, Sarah said wisely. You've been wishing too, I could tell. Gordon laughed, a free, joyous sound that echoed across the yard. Yes, I have. For longer than I dared admit, even to myself. The Christmas celebration at the Double E 3 days later was unlike any the ranch had seen in years. The house was filled with music, laughter, and the clear, sweet sound of Sarah's voice, growing stronger and more confident with each passing hour. Thomas Blackwell was welcomed as family, the past forgiven if not forgotten. Mayor Wilson and several townspeople came to share in the joy of Sarah's recovery, and to congratulate Gordon and Lillian on their engagement. As snow began to fall outside the windows, Gordon raised his glass in a toast. To new beginnings, he said, his eyes finding Lillian's across the room. And to the gentle words that healed our hearts. To gentle words, the guests echoed, none more fervently than Sarah, who beamed with the simple joy of being able to speak her happiness aloud. Later that night, as the house grew quiet and guests departed, Lillian stood by the Christmas tree, watching the firelight play across the ornaments Sarah had so carefully crafted. Gordon joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. Happy? He asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Completely, she assured him, leaning into his embrace. Though I confess, I never imagined my teaching career would lead to marriage quite so quickly. Is it too quickly? He asked, a hint of concern in his voice. Lillian turned in his arms, looking up into the face that had become so dear to her. No, she said with certainty. Some things don't need years to prove themselves true. Gordon smiled, the lines of grief that had marked his face for so long softening in the warm light. Like the fact that I will love you for the rest of my days. Like that, she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. From the staircase came a soft giggle. They turned to see Sarah watching them, her expression one of pure contentment. Mama used to say love is the best Christmas gift, she said, her voice clear and sure. I think she sent you to us, Miss Turner. Lillian blinked back tears as Gordon beckoned his daughter to join them. I think perhaps she did, she agreed, enfolding the child in a warm embrace. The three of them stood together before the fire, a family forged through loss and healing, silence and words, bound by a love that had grown in the most unexpected of circumstances. Outside, snow continued to fall on the Double E Ranch, covering the land in a blanket of white, a clean page upon which their new story together was just beginning to be written. Spring came to Grass Valley in a rush of green, the mountains shedding their snowy mantles as wildflowers carpeted the valley floor. At the Double E Ranch, preparations were underway for a May wedding, simple but elegant, just as Lillian had requested. The schoolhouse in town would close for the day, allowing all of Lillian's students to attend the ceremony that would officially make their teacher a permanent resident of Grass Valley. Sarah, now speaking as fluently as any child her age, had appointed herself unofficial wedding planner, creating elaborate drawings of flower arrangements and decorations that Mrs. Peterson struggled good-naturedly to replicate. Thomas Blackwell, now reconciled with his cousin, had returned from San Francisco with fabric for Lilian's wedding dress, a gesture that brought tears to her eyes. On the morning of the wedding, as Lilian sat before the mirror in the guest room she would soon vacate for the master bedroom, there was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Peterson with the finished dress. Instead, Sarah entered, carrying a small wooden box. "Papa said to give you this before the ceremony," she explained, setting the box on the dressing table. "It was Mama's." Lilian opened the box carefully to find a delicate pearl necklace nestled on blue velvet. "Oh, Sarah," she breathed. "It's beautiful, but I couldn't possibly." "Papa says Mama would want you to have it," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. "And I agree. She would like you, Miss Turner. You make us happy again." Lilian gathered the girl into her arms. "Thank you," she whispered against Sarah's hair, "for sharing your father with me, and for letting me love you." "It's easy to let you love me," Sarah said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "You've been doing it since the first day, even when I couldn't say thank you." Hours later, as Lilian walked toward Gordon across the ranch's flower-strewn yard, Elizabeth's pearls around her neck and Sarah beaming beside her father, she felt a profound sense of rightness. This was not the life she had imagined when she boarded that stagecoach to Grass Valley almost a year ago, but it was infinitely richer, deeper, and more meaningful than anything she could have planned. Gordon's eyes never left her face as she approached, his expression one of wonder and absolute certainty. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, he whispered, "You are even more beautiful than I dreamed." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with Mayor Wilson officiating and the entire town bearing witness. When Gordon kissed his bride, a cheer went up that startled birds from nearby trees. Sarah threw her arms around them both as soon as propriety allowed, creating a family embrace that symbolized their journey from broken individuals to a unified whole. The celebration continued well into the evening, with dancing in the barn and enough food to feed half the territory. As twilight fell, Gordon led Lilian away from the festivities to a quiet spot near the corral where they had first begun to acknowledge their feelings for each other. "Happy, Mrs. Evans?" he asked, drawing her close. "Completely, Mr. Evans," she replied, smiling up at him. "I have a wedding gift for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a folded document and placed it in her hands. Lilian opened it to find a deed not to the ranch, as she had half expected, but to the schoolhouse in town. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at him questioningly. Gordon smiled. "It's yours now, your school. The town board agreed to sell it to me, and I'm giving it to you. I know how important teaching is to you, Lilian. I would never ask you to give up your calling just because you're becoming my wife." Tears filled her eyes. "But the ranch, your responsibilities, are important," he finished for her, "as is your work. We'll manage both together. 3 days a week at the school in town, as you've been doing. Sarah will attend with the other children now that she's speaking again. The rest of the time you'll be here, helping me run the Double E if that suits you." "It suits me perfectly," Lilian whispered, overwhelmed by his understanding and generosity. "You are an extraordinary man, Gordon Evans." His arms tightened around her. "I'm simply a man who recognizes the value of what he's found. You gave Sarah back her voice, Lilian. You gave me back my heart. The least I can do is ensure you keep the work that brings you such fulfillment." Their kiss was interrupted by the patter of running feet as Sarah approached, breathless with excitement. "Mrs. Peterson says it's time to cut the cake," she announced. "And Uncle Thomas is telling everyone about the time Papa fell into the creek trying to catch a fish with his hands." Gordon groaned. That man has no sense of discretion. Lilian laughed, taking his arm. Come, husband, let's salvage your reputation before Thomas reveals any more of your youthful misadventures. As they walked back toward the celebration, Sarah skipping ahead, Gordon leaned close to whisper in Lilian's ear. I love you, Lilian Evans, more than I ever thought possible to love again. And I love you, she replied, squeezing his hand, for giving me not just your heart but a family. The years that followed brought changes to the Double E Ranch, a school wing added to the main house for the children too far from town to attend regularly. A publishing company in San Francisco printing Sarah's illustrated stories of ranch life. The patter of little feet as the Evans family welcomed a son, then twin daughters. Through it all, Lilian maintained her school in town 3 days a week, while helping Gordon manage the increasingly prosperous ranch. Sarah blossomed into a confident young woman with her father's directness and her stepmother's compassion, her voice growing stronger with each passing year, until the memory of her silent days seemed almost like a story that had happened to someone else. On their 5th anniversary, as Gordon and Lilian sat on the porch swing watching their children play in the yard, 11-year-old Sarah teaching 4-year-old James, and the 2-year-old twins, Emma and Alina, a game involving much laughter and running, Gordon took his wife's hand. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Coming to Grass Valley, marrying a rancher with a troubled past. Lilian leaned against his shoulder, contentment warming her voice. Never, not for a single moment. Even when the twins decided to paint the kitchen table with molasses, he teased. Even then, she laughed. Though I reserve the right to change my answer when they reach Sarah's age. Gordon's arm tightened around her shoulders. I still can't believe how fortunate I am, he said, watching their children. To have found you, to hear Sarah's voice again, to have this family. It wasn't fortune, Lilian said softly. It was healing, for all of us. She turned to look at him, the love of 5 years having only deepened with time. And it began with words, gentle words that opened hearts long closed. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the valley in gold and amber, the sound of children's laughter mingled with the evening breeze, a symphony of joy that had begun with silence and found its voice in love.